A brief overview of today's agenda. What we'll do is discuss the grant initiative specific to CTI, of course. We're going to discuss what's new this round, the anticipated grant terms, program requirements, completing the budget, evaluation criteria, and how to communicate with us, especially for Q&A throughout the duration while procurement is open. Unlike our pre-application TA assistance session, the bidders webinar is very specific to submitting and completing and sending a response to the proposal that we set forth for CTI and its components this time around. So please use this time to, if you haven't already reviewed the RFP, there's plenty of time to do so, and we'll go through the details of it so you can best know how to respond and prepare for this round. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Meg.
Great. So as we mentioned, the RFP has been live on our website as of earlier this week and has about 8 sections that contain a lot of information that you need when building out your application and programs for round 7 of CTI. So if you are starting to build programs and have any questions about who is eligible to apply for funding, who are we serving, and with what programs, what are the administrative expectations during the grant period, such as invoicing or reporting, data management, what are the allowable costs and the funding available for this grant? When can I expect to receive any communication from CommCorp? What happens to my application after I submit it? What's the evaluation and scoring criteria? Or what are the parts of the application? All of those materials. All of that information is included in the RFP. So again, encourage you to download it from the website, take a look. If you find that you need any additional clarification on any of those points, we have resources set up. We'll be going through them a little bit later through the presentation as well. So this is just kind of a breakdown of the RFP sections included in. I'm going to swing it back to Katani to kind of discuss what is new with this round of funding, what's new about CTI round 7. Katani, take it away.
Thank you. So new this round, there's a couple things that are new. One of them we'll discuss in this slide, and the next we'll do in another. But first, I'd like to find out who's in the room. So I'm going to issue a poll. You'll see a poll come up on your screen. Please take time to just quickly respond and let us know who's here. I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that poll. Again, there's a poll that's just wondering who's in the room. Are you returning school or grantee? Are you new to CTI? Are you employer partner or mass hire partner or other? We'll give it another 10 seconds. All right, perfect. Thank you for that information. I'm going to share it with you just so you see who's here. Again, about 56% of the audience are returning and new grantees. We have a couple that are new to CTI, welcome, and some mass hire partners and probably some CommCorp staff that are here to support the work. So thank you all for that. All right, so new this round for the career technical initiatives. What we have here is a graph that details how funding has been administered and spread throughout the previous rounds. You'll see here when CTI was first initiated in 2020, but in the 2021 state budget, we had about $4 million of seed money for CTI. It has grown quite significantly over time. And right now, some of round 6 and especially leading into round 7, we have a combined $45.4 million to fund CTI and to retrain unemployed and underemployed workers at Massachusetts high schools with, of course, the Chapter 74 designations. Funding is available this round and as for previous rounds for the 20 approved in-demand occupations.
So when you're starting to think about your programming and especially your timelines, I'm including This is from the RFP, this little schedule about submission and communication expectations. Say that we are anticipating to start contracts with a March 1st, 2023 start date that run 2 years and will end February 28th, 2025. So it's a 2-year grant period. When you're starting to think about timeline and planning with respect to this anticipated grant term, keep in mind that the contract start date of March 1st marks when you can begin billing CommCorp for your activities. So if you have a program that you want to run but want to include 4, 6, 8 weeks of recruitment and marketing that you'd like to bill us for, then build in that time into your schedule. As long as it takes place within this grant period, we would love to have your programs. Similarly, on the back end, a requirement of this program is that you are not only training participants and having them complete your training and gain credentials, also working to find them training related employment that they then are retained for 30 calendar days. So you want to build in enough time on the back end for your participants to not only finish their program, find employment, and then stay there for 30 days. So for example, I shouldn't see a program that has the cohort end February 15th, 2025. You won't be able to count any of those cohort outcomes towards your grant performance. So now we're just going to take time to kind of go over the program requirements. Again, listed in greater detail in the RFP itself as well. As Katani already mentioned, this CTI funding is specifically to address demand in construction, trades, and manufacturing industries. So CTI is developing training for 20 in-demand occupations that you can see correspond to a Chapter 74 program. I'm going to use the language, if you're not familiar, of program pathway. Like throughout this presentation, you'll probably be very sick of me hearing saying program pathway. But that would be plumbing is a program pathway that you're running a cohort in. So you'll see this list again in the RFP, and the programs that you're planning to run and proposing should be on this list of eligible construction, trades, and manufacturing occupations. Okay. And Katani is going to talk a little bit about the target population and who this grant is planning to serve.
Great. So the other thing that's new this round includes how we're defining underemployment. But as usual with our credentialing pipeline programs, grant funds are used to train Massachusetts residents who are currently unemployed or underemployed. Now, defining these has had many iterations since CTI's inceptions. And I know it may not have always been the most straightforward thing to not just document, but verify and ensure that you were in compliance with these programs. We, CommCorp, as the funder, want to ensure that these funds are accessible and allow just wide accommodations to ensure that we're reaching and targeting the unemployed and underemployed. And so we had iterations of this because we were just trying to get it right. So this time around, the way that we're defining underemployment, I'll speak about it a little more in the next slide, will look somewhat closer to round 5, but with some nuances and a lot more prescription to help schools and even their partnering career centers know how best to document and verify and sort of move on with program training. So as you may already know, and pretty easy, self-explanatory, an unemployed individual is defined as an individual who is not currently employed at the time of enrollment. So even if the individual receives an unsubsidized employment during the pathway, they were still eligible to participate because at the time of enrollment, they were unemployed. The other way that people can get into your training program is if they're underemployed. And an underemployed individual, which again, this is new this round, is defined as an individual who is earning less than 60% of the median household income, also referred to as area median income, for the workforce area in which they reside. So the following chart we're going to put in the next slide, we'll take a deeper dive in that. So I want to clarify that we are using the USDA estimates. They are drafted and posted December for the following year. And so what we're currently using and what's in the RFP is from 2020. Now, the end of December this year, we'll receive the 2021 numbers, and we'll issue that to all our grantees. We expect this definition of underemployment to have wide application, not just for CTI, but all of our credentialing pipeline program, which includes the WCTF, which is a Workforce Competitiveness Trust Fund as well. So a few notes about this change. This will change annually. And again, CommCorp will issue the official 60% and what the chart is to all our grantees. It will be in your grantee guide. And as the chart gets updated again annually, we will repost, and that will be the numbers that you will use to help screen individuals. We ask all of our grantees who will eventually get funding that this chart, you will assess individual income and not the household. Despite us using median household income, that terminology is really just to help us measure, but you are only assessing the individual person's income. No need to ask what their partners or whoever they have in the household and their employment status are. It won't be relevant for this. This is broken down by 16 regions, not county. And so we believe that if it was broken down by county, it would be a bit crazy making. And so the breakdown for the 16 workforce regions are to accommodate as many people as possible. Just as a bit of context, we compare the USDA numbers with the state and local fiscal recovery funds estimates. And this one, the USDA was a lot more accommodating. So we want to use whatever will allow the most individuals to access training and be eligible for it with this definition. Much like many federal grants or state grants, there is generally a measurement that is pretty prescriptive that allows people to sort of make their determinants, check off the box, and be able to access funding. Similarly, CommCorp wants to carry out that same process. So again, that it's a lot more prescriptive. We used to have grantees tell us, you know, what you wanted to do as long as it meant underemployment or unemployment, and that was historically a bit vague. So this time around, we're going to model what many grant-making entities have done and just tell you how to determine eligibility on the basis of unemployment for Massachusetts. I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. We're going to hold off on answering them towards the end of the slide, but please feel free to write them. We're going to be sure to answer it. Also, there is flexible documentation with respect to how you document and account for someone's eligibility using this chart. Now, it's oftentimes for low income or the population that we generally serve with these grants, these grant programs. Individuals may not always do their taxes. And so that's not, using a 1040 is not the only way that we will account for how we can determine whether or not someone is meeting any of these markers. So an individual can use a single pay stub, or they can use a tax information. We want to make sure that we can account for their eligibility in a way that's, again, as accessible to meeting the people where they are. Now, once you become a grantee, we will also issue a grantee guide in that you will have supplemental documents that will allow customers to self-attest while they're verifying, because, say, for example, someone might be making a high hourly wage, but they only work either by contract or for a temporary position. And so they would never amount to an annual income that would surpass the other 6% AMI. And so they can get in either by hourly wage or by annual income. Whichever gets them in, that's what people will use. And again, there'll be much more guidance about this come, you know, applicants become grantees, and especially as we do orientation, that will be detailed, and all the documents will be given to help guide and support that. Another point is individuals who are either TANF recipients, SNAP recipients, are participating in a program that requires a low income status in order for you to be eligible, including WIOA Title I services. They will be automatically eligible, and we will allow provisions so that it won't be, you don't have to sort of do a whole bunch of things in order to get to verify their income status. If they can showcase that they are a TANF recipient at the time of enrollment, or they are WIO eligible at the time of enrollment, then that would be suffice because they would automatically be eligible for CTI because this is based on median household, not necessarily low income. And finally, again, we will have more prescriptive guidance and tools once the schools are awarded. We'll have guidance specifically for the career centers and how they screen, and especially for schools for your record keeping in terms of what we're looking for to define it. So again, to wrap up, we were using the 60% AMI to account to help folks determine if they are underemployed at the time of enrollment. And it's by the 16 workforce regions, not by county. This is in your RFP. And once awards are made, grantees will receive all the supplemental information and tools they will need in order to make this as more prescriptive and direct as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to program eligibility, as you may already know, we require still this round as well, 3 employer partnerships with a signed MOA, which is a memorandum of agreement, as part of your application. Now, these employer letters are intended to showcase their support, their ability to potentially interview and hire and place your trainees once they complete the program or receive that industry recognized credential, and they can also inform your training curriculum. And so that's just a requirement of CTI. You can have more than 3, but 3 is the minimum. And each letter, either by individual or over they can either individually account for that particular program pathway that you are providing training for, or you can have one employer agree to hire and place and so forth with a number of your pathways. So say if you have an employer that needs welders and electricians, or they need electricians and this and that, as long as your letters, all 3 of them, account for all your program pathways, those are our strongest applications are most likely to get funded. We say this because we do not want other pathways not be accounted for by a potential employer, and thus creating what could potentially be some issues with placement once the program is completed. So there's a couple ways that you can make use of your employer agreements. Again, you need 3 as minimum. Each 3, if you have 3 pathways, for example, can account for all 3 individually, or the employer can cover a couple or multiple program pathways, depending on what the employer is able to do. The other MOA that you are required to have with your application is one with your Mass Hire Career Center. It should be the one that's local to you, that's in your region, and that we expect that you would have a relationship that is not just reflective of the MOA, but one that really showcases how you will have a shared responsibility to support recruitment and screening, and eventually supporting program graduates back into the mass hire system if that becomes necessary. And so we encourage you, if you don't already know, to make connections or build your connections with your local Mass Hire Career Center. If you want to bridge that connection, we have market makers and upskilling navigators, maybe not for all the mass hires that are in the community, or reach out to us and we'll help bridge the connection so that you can ensure good alignment where expectations are managed well and everyone knows how they're supporting recruitment into CTI. This is important to account for because CTI is a program that's not modeled after many of the programs that are often coming out of mass hire or the career centers because of they're not WIOA programs. It's not an ITA, it's not a VST. So with CTI, because the eligibility requirements are a lot more flexible than that of WIOA, and because of the limits that centers have in order to fill those and get their metrics and so forth, it will take real intentionality to present this option of CTI to potential participants among a catalog of opportunities, especially as this one is fully subsidized, and customers may be able to make a choice, especially if they weren't eligible for WIOA. So we want to ensure that not just the upskilling navigators or your BSRs or your career counselors that are mass hires are aware of how to talk about CTI, and that doesn't happen without the connections and the relationships that you would build with them as your partner. So again, these are the required MOAs that you need, three from an employer, one with your Mass Hire Career Center. We have templates of those in the RFP for your use. And finally, we strongly recommend, it's not required, but we do expect that our grantees and the ones who submit the strongest applications, that they demonstrate that their program is in alignment and with support with their local mass hire workforce boards. There's so much room for engagements and aligning efforts. And so we also want to see that your workforce board is committed in supporting the work with this application. Next slide, please. All right.
Yeah, this one goes to me. I'm going to take some time now to kind of walk through all of the application materials that are part of the round 7 application. You can kind of see them all listed out here. The RFP will use the language of part 1 through 5 to see that. Part 1 is the application summary form. This is completed online. If you follow the link that's either on the available funding page or within the RFP, that is going to take you to the application summary form. That's where you're going to upload parts 2, 3, and 4, which are attachments to that application. So part 2 is the application narrative form. This is going to be a 2 to 3 page Word document that just adds some extra context to your programs and your connections with your employers and mass hire. So we're not looking for something insanely long, just a 2 to 3 page explanation. Part 3 is the bulk of the application. I would say that's the program and budget form. This is accessed, it's available for download on our website. It's right under the RFP. It's a little file that says program and budget form final. That's the one that you're going to download from the website to fill out all this information. This is where you're going to put details about the programs that you're running, the timeline that you'll be running them on, what credentials are they getting, how many hours are they in person, as well as your budget, how you intend to use the funds that you're requesting. Just as a note, the minimum is that you're suggesting at least one program pathway for 10 students, and that those programs are between 200 and 300 hours of programming. Part 4 is the memoranda of agreements, letters of support. We just talked about them, so I'm going to just briefly touch on them. This is submitted as kind of a one mega PDF of all of these letters, and the 3 employers, the Career Center, the Mass Hire Workforce Board recommended. Those are submitted as well. Again, there are sample language found in the RFP. You're also welcome to use your own templates for those, as long as they clearly delineate the roles and responsibilities of each partner. And the final section that you'll see as part 5 in the RFP is just an online certification. It's the last section of the online form. It just says that you're in good standing in Massachusetts and that you have the ability to actually carry out the programs that you're suggesting. So kind of just a write-off. I'm just going to walk through all these pieces in a little bit greater detail. Part 1, application summary form. Again, this is the online form. This is the information that I'll be collecting. What's really important about this form that I want to emphasize here is that I would wait until all of your other uploads and materials are ready to go before starting to fill this out, as you are not able to save your progress and return to that form. If you close out of the tab, you will lose anything that you have entered if you don't hit submit. So get all of your uploads ready to go, sit down, complete it all in one sitting, and hit submit. Plan to have handy just some of your organization details, partnership info, which career center you're working with, who are your employer partners, some of the program details, like which program pathways are you suggesting, how much are you asking for, how much money, how many people are you planning to serve, and then some contact information. So that's really important because it lets us know who should we be reaching out to once you have a status update on your grant, once we're awarding you or not. So have all of that ready to go before sitting down to fill out the application summary form. So the first upload of the application is technically called part 2, the application narrative. Again, this is the 2 to 3 page Word document. The questions that you're answering in this Word document are found at the end of your RFP in the last section of application materials. It's kind of just asking, again, for some context of your programs, looking for your relationship with the Mass Higher Career Center. So each of these kind of topics have some sub questions to be answered. So a good application will answer all of the questions that are included in the RFP. So the first section asks about your collaboration with Mass Hire. What's your history, experience working with them? What's your current relationship? Have you been meeting recently? Do you have a tangible plan of next steps in your recruitment? We also want to know about your employer engagement. Are you working with employers that are confirmed to have input not only on agreeing to interview people from your program, but they're also included in curriculum, and your credentials and what people are learning in your programs actually match what they need. So that's going to be important. This third section is kind of just a brief overview of your programmatic elements. It does include some questions about a COVID contingency plan, just as a warning. Again, only 2 to 3 pages, so we're not looking for every bit of curriculum for all of your programs, so just a brief explanation. And then finally, this last one, that not everybody is going to be filling this out. This is a question about the startup funds, which I'm just going to make clear again here and probably a lot more later, is the startup funds are a one-time $40,000 additional award that comes on top of your implementation award, which is the money that it takes to run your program. So if you have already received a startup award from a previous round of funding, you are not eligible for another $40,000, which means on the plus side is that you get to skip this question. Which is very not applicable. If you are applying, you're a new school, you need some startup funds. This question just asks, what are you planning to use these for? Okay. So a brief note on kind of performance benchmarks and outcomes as we're starting to think about what makes a successful program. And apologies if you've been in any CTI related event in the past month, you have seen this chart and heard me do this explanation probably 17 times by now. So, take a break. So if you are new and you've never seen this before and you want to hear about what this is, kind of throughout the grant, there's 3 benchmarks during a cohort. Comes at the beginning when you get people enrolled into your program, comes at the end of the programming when you have them complete the program and attain the credentials. And then I mentioned this earlier, but it's the job placement and 30-day retention. So those are kind of benchmarks where we want to check in on performance for every cohort that you're running. So this chart appears in the contract. So this is kind of the final agreement that we're signing with you as the school about what you're going to be performing for us during the outcome of grant. This is how we're going to judge whether your program is successful or not. When you're starting to plan out your programs and thinking about how many people you want to serve, what programs do you think are going to be the most successful, I think it's important that you kind of know what we're thinking about what a successful program is. So maybe this 70 to 80% threshold of what's meeting our expectations. Maybe it's higher than you thought it would be, maybe it's lower than you thought it'd be, but just to be for clarity about what a successful program looks like. And for additional clarity, it's consistently coming in on not meeting the threshold benchmarks is not an immediate cue for us to pull funding. Understand that there are a lot of factors that go into program success. You could have the best program in the world, but nobody can predict perhaps a pandemic that might affect the way that your program runs. So it's not an immediate pull the plug on funding if you don't actually end up meeting some of these benchmarks. It is just a cue for us that when we look at future funding opportunities, whether if you're looking to keep scaling up when you haven't met your performance benchmarks, that's a red flag for us. It's a beat, and it's starting to think about what can we work on. So just for transparency about what we're looking for from our programs, this is it. Starting to think about how many people you want to serve. Think about how many people you actually how many people you actually have the capacity to see through all the way to that 30-day retention. Okay. So if you left during that because you've heard it 17 times, please come back. I'm going to talk about the program and budget form. So this is part 3 of the application. Again, it's the key document. It's the Excel workbook. And it's kind of broken down even further into 3 different parts. There is a program summary and timeline, program details, and the budget. So first up is the program summary and timeline. This is, kind of a key page, I would say. This is where you're listing out all of your program pathways that you're intending to run. So you want to run a welding pathway, you want to run electrical, you want to run carpentry. This is where you're listing them out, and how many proposed number of cohorts or how many times you want to run this program. So you're running at least one program one time with 10 people. That's our minimum standard. But if you'd like to run an electrical in summer 2023 and again in spring 2024, that's great. You're putting 2 cohorts down. Some of this form is going to auto-populate as you start to fill these things in. So if you put in that you want to run 2 cohorts of 10, the total enrollees for that pathway will auto-populate with 20. I'm going to talk about the maximum budget because it's very important and it will come up later. The implementation budget, which again is kind of like the money that you're spending to run these programs. It's your staff time, it's your training materials, it's any support services, any contractors that you need to bring in. That is determined by $6,000 times the total number of people that you plan to enroll. So you'll see as you start to fill in this form that this maximum budget, the total maximum budget, which is in the pink rectangle on here, that will be $6,000 times your total number of enrollees. When you start to fill in your budget form, don't go over that number. In fact, I would take that number and work backwards and fill in the rest of your budget from there. So that will autofill. You don't have to do any math, promise. But just keep in mind that when you're building your programs, that's the number that you have to work with. We're looking at a cost per participant of $6,000. Timeline-wise, you're just filling in as best you have your cohort anticipated start dates and end dates. Again, remember, keep in mind the grant term that we set out, which is contract starting March 1st, 2023, ending February 28, 2025. So don't suggest a cohort that's going to start February 1st, 2023, because we're not going to be able to fund that. You're not going to get there in time. List out every cohort separately. Welding cohort 1, welding cohort 2, and just a note on some best practices for this as somebody who's going to be reading your application. Strong applications leave enough buffer time between cohorts for startup activities and recruitment and buffer. It's not uncommon to need to push back some cohorts. You need 2 weeks to do some extra recruitment because you didn't get the number up. That's totally fine. If you have scheduled your cohorts back to back to back to back, and you need to push the dates of one program, then you just need to push them all back. But if you've left some room, then you might not be running into that problem. So that's a sign of smart planning to me, because if you don't want to be completely off and you might not be able to run things consecutively because you don't have the capacity, just leave yourself some room, build that in. And this is just a plug for my personal preference, but I have a microphone. If you can, include specific dates, like November 1st, 2022, or 11/1/2022, rather than just being like November 2022. Just because when it comes time to do contracting and I want to be prioritizing your contract based on your start date, there's a big difference between a contract that's starting, between programming that's starting November 1st and November 30th. Just a personal note. I can't really do anything if you don't do that, but just fun. All right. The next piece is the program design tab. In the form that you download, there is one tab with this information on it. The most important thing to remember is that I will need a separate tab for every program pathway that you intend to run. So if you want to run welding, electrical, and carpentry, I should see 3 program detail tabs in your workbook, 1 for welding, 1 for electrical, and 1 for carpentry. This is kind of, this is the bulk of the program. This is where we're going to see what certifications and credentials you're having your participants do, what the shape of their program looks like in terms of hours and where they're spent. So it's really important that these are as up to date and accurate as you think they're going as you can. You'll notice at the bottom, again, the total number of hours for your programs should be between 200 hours and 300 hours. And just a little note so that people don't get confused and yell at me, at the bottom of this program design section, it's not in the screenshot, but there is a little box that has a bunch of yes or no questions about your school's experience with adult training programs. Please fill that out, but you only need to answer it on one program tab. So if you have the welding, the electrical, and the carpentry, I only need to see that the answers to that on one of those tabs. The other ones you can just ignore. So, and it will say that on there, so you don't need to just remember that. But that is the program design. Right, and the last part of this budget, program and budget form, is the budget itself. In kind of like a rushing nesting doll sense, the budget section of the program and budget form is also 3 different sections. The first one you'll see as tab 3C is the budget summary. You don't need to touch this page at all. In fact, you cannot make any changes to it at all. The one thing that I would look at here is there's a box that says cost per participant, and that is tracking automatically your total implementation from the budget narrative, which we'll talk about, and the total number of participants that you put in on your program summary page. And it's, you know, dividing your money by your participants. And if that number goes over 6,000, then you will have gone over budget and you've gone over the cost per participant. So just keep an eye on that. It will turn red. So it should be easy to notice. The next piece is the budget narrative. Again, this is going to have 2 different budgets contained in it. It will have the implementation budget, again, capped at $6,000 per enrollment, and the startup capped at a one-time $40,000 reward. So if you've already received startup, feel free to ignore that second budget. This is where you're including all the information about, how you're going to spend these funds. I'm going to zoom out for a second just to say that CTI is a cost reimbursement grant. So you have program expenses that come along with running the program. You have to pay staff, you have, again, program materials, you have training materials, you want curriculum built, that you have those costs, you're going to pay them, and then you're going to invoice CommCorp for that. We'll send you a customized invoice template, and you'll be billing us for the cost of running your program. It's not going to be tied to either how many people that you end up enrolling or those performance benchmarks. That's not the way that CTI is running anymore. So when you're filling out this budget, this is how you think that you're going to need the money, $6,000 per student, including as details as you can. The description of the use of funds is going to be really helpful in kind of helping us understand what your budget is doing. Again, best practice is to work backwards from that maximum budget that's highlighted in the pink box, remember, on the program summary page, and working backwards from there. Say that CommCorp has the discretion and has in the past just started awarding everybody the maximum budget. So even if you have a maximum budget, you're running a 20-person cohort, that's a $120,000 maximum budget, $6,000 times 20. And you write your budget and you're like, oh, we're only coming in at $100,000. So that's the budget that we'll submit. We might still end up awarding you $120,000 to run this program. And then you can work it out with your program manager, very excitingly, what to do with your extra $20,000. Or you can just start from $120,000 and submit that. I've kind of loaded in some fake example description of use costs of what this is going to look like to fill out the budget. A rate times unit to build out all of the expenses. If you have a cost that doesn't quite break down neatly into rate times unit, just be really sure to break down exactly what it's going for in the use of funds. You have a bunch of things that all cost different amounts. Totally understandable. Just break down what you're actually trying to buy in the description of use funds. And you'll notice, and all of our veteran CTI schools will notice as well, that the salary and fringe section that you can see on the screenshot looks a little different than usual. The third section of the budget are called the staff detail sheets now. People who have received an invoice template from CTI or even WCTF might notice that the staff detail sheets look very similar to the staff summary sheet of your invoice template, just as a hint. Instead of filling out all of your staff people in the staff salary and fringe section like you used to in a budget submission, you're going to go to the staff detail sheet and fill it out there. You'll need the staff person's name if you have it. Understand that you might not have hired for the role. You just have the idea that you need it. Their role you will need. They're the carpentry instructor, they're the CTE director, they're the administrative assistant. The number of budgeted hours that you intend for the grant period. They are working 25 hours a week, X amount of weeks. Then their pay rate, like you would. And then there is a place to include a fringe rates if that is how you intend to do your payroll. All of that you fill out on the staff detail sheet will automatically populate on the budget narrative. So you don't need to touch that section of the budget narrative, just fill it out on the staff detail sheet. So if you have any questions about what costs are allowable, can I do this in the budget? Please know that there is some guidance listed out in the RFP. So read that very closely. If not, all of the other resources are always available, Q&A and email addresses, just to reach out and get some clarity. So, okay, that is the end of the application materials. Once you have assembled all of that and submit it, Tania's going to talk through what happens on our end when we start to evaluate those applications.
All right, thank you, Meg. And just a reminder, all this information is going to be recorded. It's in your RFP, but we also have this the slide deck, especially on our webpage, so you can refer back to. It's a lot of information, a couple new changes, and want to ensure that you're able to capture all of them. So, scoring criteria. You submitted your proposal. What happens next? So the first thing that happens is we do a threshold screening. You may be familiar, but that's just to confirm that you met all the bare bones, the basic needs to even qualify to apply for this funding. So that means we're going to check your FEIN number. We're going to ensure that you're a Chapter 74 vocational high school. We're going to look to ensure that you meet all the needs and have all the tax documents necessary to apply for this kind of funding. So after the threshold screening, we'll also do the compliance screening, which similarly goes through your standing as a school and your ability to apply for this funding. If all the signatories and the appropriateness of them are all in place. If you're a returning school, you're familiar with this. These are all things that we check for just to ensure that we can move forward with the review process in full. And then each proposal is reviewed by a committee of 3 to 4 persons. This review committee, every person is required to sign confidentiality and conflicts of interest disclosure statements. We want to ensure that the review and selection of your grant is conducted in a fair, transparent, and competitive way. So there's 3 to 4 persons that are reviewing your application. They're all given screening criteria that they have to judge your application against. So there's not a lot of time or capacity for our arbitrary conclusions here. There are strict guidance that we give. You'll also see that criteria in your RFP. There's no secrets there. That's what we use to assess the fitness of your application. And then the scores of each reviewer are documented. Now, generally, if the reviewers are doing everything right, which generally happens, the scores trend in the same direction, which allow us to make a comfortable decision to recommend an application for funding. If, however, there's a great deal of variance between reviewer to reviewer in scoring of one application, that application goes for a desk review. So we can understand why that variance may have happened and to explain the components of whether we would move forward with an application or not. And sometimes that kind of determination means that we could approve with conditions, which could mean reducing a number of funding or reducing a cohort or two. So again, desk reviews only occur if there's significant score variance. It's important to understand that CommCorp maintains discretion in recommendation award amounts as well. So not only do we have discretion in who is awarded, we do consider past performance to account for whether or not a returning school especially will be successful moving forward. Usually what might stop a returning school from being funded again is if we have no history of performance, no outcomes, or if the outcomes were poor. And so in order for us to continue an investment with the school, we need to understand how your performance have gone historically to ensure that it will be a successful program moving forward. It's also part of the reason why we review performance outcomes with all prospective bidders, just to establish the expectation. And again, proposals may be awarded in full or conditionally, or sometimes you may get a little more money as long as it doesn't surpass the $6,000 per cap. And then finally, we make a recommendation for awards to the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development. They provide the final approval. CommCorp gives our recommendation, they review it and approve. And generally what many of you may have already experienced is they may approve it, but the award announcement might take several weeks before it is formally announced. So you may receive an approval, we'll send you an award letter, but you'll notice that we'll say this award is embargoed. And all that means is you can't talk about it publicly to public stakeholders, or you can't print it in the newspaper. You can't do it ahead of the governor's office. So we will still move forward with your contracting, your training may already start, but it won't be formally announced until the governor's office. Generally they like to send a press release around it. So once that happens, we'll inform you all when the embargo is lifted, and then you can move forward and socialize the notice of your award. Now, if you're a grantee and you were not awarded this round's grantees and you appeal to that decision, either because you had concerns about the review process, you had concerns of conflict of interest, you have the right to appeal a determination. So all your rights, all that's available in this process are fully written in the RFP, but I'm reviewing here just for greater transparency and visibility. Next slide, please. So your evaluation criteria, detailed here are basically the criteria that are in our review materials that each reviewer will use to score your application. We look for a track record and approval to deliver the success of a program, again, Chapter 74 Voc Tech schools. We want to see a demonstrative history of providing adult workforce training. And especially your pathway, that you have the credentials and that you can provide the certificate or credentials to ensure that people are leaving with what they came for. You have a demonstrative history of collaborating in workforce training and especially with your partnership with the Mass Higher Career Centers and Workforce Boards. We want to see just recent conversations with local career centers that you've, again, not just signing an MOA or renewing your commitment, but that there's been accounts for any nuances, different staff capacity needs that you account for and how you share some of the responsibilities. We'd like to see strong evidence and clearly articulated MOA letters. The more specific your MOA's letters are, the better, because if you can detail, for example, for our welding training and carpentry program, employer X agrees to pay, or employer X anticipates 25% increase in their workforce, making 20 positions available. They will commit to interview and job place, if necessary, participants graduating out of this particular program. So that's kind of the details we want to see, and all of that again is in the RFP. We want to see clear program outlines that address occupational skills, safety, work readiness, work experience requirements, how you'll use your supportive services to really support your cohort of trainees. All that would be great if you detail where you will be scored and evaluated on that basis. And finally, your capacity to deliver training to adhere to social distancing or any kind of contingency plan. So we want you to have a plan B if needs be. What would happen if something would cause the program to shut down in short notice, or if you had a class where 50% of your class all got COVID at once. So these sorts of things is how you can plan and prepare as best you can so that you can continue to run your program successfully. Next slide, please. And again, another note for non-awardees: if your program is not recommended for funding, CommCorp does reach out to those applicants and provide feedback, detailed feedback on scoring. Now, the reasons for denial may be common reasons or based on past performance. And by common, I mean, we try to package common reasons that people may not have been able to be recommended for funding at that time. It could be a number of things. And if you hit one of those areas, that's sort of the feedback you will receive in addition to past performance, if that's one of the reasons someone was not recommended for funding. Now, applicants are also invited for technical assistance, one-on-one meetings, and invited to reapply once their concerns are addressed with some pre-application technical assistance. So for folks, for many of our schools, it's never an outright firm no, it's a no for right now. We'll support you building a strong application and knowing some of the nuances of the program, and then we will invite you to reapply. We really want to fund as many schools as possible, but understanding that it takes some getting used to, some building, some planning to provide this nighttime shift of schooling and what it means to have the administrative capacity to do so. And so we want to ensure that we create a pipeline to have you come back for funding if at this particular round you are not recommended. And finally, these are some links of where you can find some resources that will be helpful for completing your application. Of course, there's RFP, there's the regional blueprints, there's a list of Mass Hire career centers and a list of Mass Hire workforce boards. We're assuming that you're already familiar with those folks, but if at any point you want to make a connection, again, we want to cue your market maker, cue your upskilling navigators. Please reach out to them to help form strong relationships so you can have a well-rounded, comprehensive program going forward. Next slide. All right. And so in this section, as you know, as with any procurement process, please ask questions. We invite your questions throughout the procurement period, and this schedule details when you can do that and when you can expect responses from CommCorp. So as Meg said, the RFP is open. It's live on the website right now. The first deadline to submit written questions will be November 3rd. So just a week from today, I think, and answers will be posted more or less a week after each time after that first posting. So our initial posting will be November 7th, then again on 14th, and again, if necessary, on November 18th. We want to get all these questions answered before you submit your application. So the 18th is cutting it close. It's only if necessary, but look out on November 7th for written responses to any questions posted beginning November 3rd. And your proposals are due November 21st. By 11:59 p.m. So we want you to get your proposals in just before Thanksgiving. I believe that day might be a Monday or a Tuesday. I think it's a Monday, but just before Thanksgiving, get it in, go home, have some apple pie, enjoy your holidays, and hopefully we can come back with good news when we notify applicants of their status. We're anticipating January. We put January, February just for a little cushion, but we're anticipating January, want to get over the holiday lull and communicate with all of you whether or not you were recommended for funding. Now, once you are recommended for funding, as we've been saying, your contract start date, which may not necessarily be your training cohort start date, will be no sooner than March 1st, 2023. So we want to ensure there's buffer time to get the contracts in place, get your materials together, review that budget one more time, add money, reduce money, whatever we need to do in order to get you set up to have your contracts in place. No matter when no matter what time your contract starts, as long as it's March 1st or later, all contracts will end February 28, 2025. That'll be all of them. We do that for administrative ease. But just know that's the firm timeline we're working on to get outcomes in as Meg detailed. And so we have some links there where you can submit your questions. They're also in the RFP. And Meg will detail some more information about where to find all this information in our next slide.
Great, we have this up here. What I'm going to do instead actually is stop sharing the presentation, and we're going to kind of walk through live where to find all of this. I'll just switch over my screens. So you should all be seeing the CommCorp website, where you're going to look, coming in at commcorp.org to find the available funding. page up here at the top. It will load faster. Okay, and you'll see all of our available funding opportunities. So I'm scrolling down until you see Career Technical Initiatives, Requests for Proposals, and let's learn more. Right, so it might take a second to load because there's a lot of content here. But from the top, see CTI, Requests for Proposals. This section under Download is where you're going to find the RFP and the Program and Budget Form that I just talked about for an hour. Under that, you'll find additional resources, including these are the slides from last week's pre-application technical assistance section. Then you'll also see the registration information for our upcoming additional procurement support event. So this would be today, so this is happening right now. You can register for any of the events, including the office hours or the in-person planning session through this Eventbrite link, which I will open up. Okay, well, it works better other places. Finally, you'll see, those betters are it's happening now. Our office hours, you'll see the Zoom link to access that. That's happening November 1st from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Then on November 3rd, Aspen Valley is hosting a in-person planning session for schools that are new to CTI. That's November 3rd from 9:30 to 11:30 in person. And then we'll have another set of office hours happening November 3rd from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Again, also through Zoom. So you can just drop in, ask any questions that you have about the presentation. Finally, this is the recording from last week's session. This is also where we'll be posting the recording that we're doing right now. So this is actually kind of meta once people are signing in to watch this. And we just talked about the Q&A. This is where you're going to access it. The question link here to find that. This is also, you can sign up through the same link to be notified once answers are posted, even if you don't have a question yourself, you want to see what other people are asking. Then you'll be notified via email once new answers have been posted again on that November 7th, 14th, and possibly the 18th again. So keeping that in mind, and then the submission, starting the application, that is accessed through here. So clicking this link will bring you to part 1, application summary page. We'll be putting all of that information, as well as some contact information for us here. Again, the RFP able to be accessed, able to submit through that link until November 21st at 11:59 p.m.
All right, great. Another reminder, I know Meg may have already shared this, but please be sure to gather all your application materials before you submit. You can only submit it in one sitting. You can't go back and save. So make sure you have all your materials packaged and ready to submit in the form that as prescribed in that one sitting. And again, for the remaining procurement events, there's a link in the chat that has all of them. So please register for your convenience, have the links, put a calendar marker for yourself so you can see us if you need to in these other sessions. All right. So now we'll move on to the question and answer portion of this. We saw your questions in the chat. Thank you for posing them. But I'm going to ask a question first, if you don't mind. I want to just get a sense of how likely you are to apply for funding. So I'm going to push this. You'll see that in front of your screen. Please answer. We'll give it about 50 seconds. And there should be a poll in front of your screen. Let us know how likely you are to apply for funding. Give it another 10 seconds. All right. Thank you for that information. So now we enter the question and answer portion. I'm going to start with what's in the chat, just so we can capture on the recording. But if you have another question that you would prefer to raise your hand and vocalize with us on this on this meeting, please do. So the first question is this new underemployment criteria for round 6 or for round 7? Great question. So what we'll do is we will make the 60% AMI effective, but only for training cohorts in previously funded rounds that have not started yet. So for cohorts that have already started, and you have your people in, there's no worry about it. You're fully fine. Those folks are eligible. In fact, the way that we are determining eligibility for underemployed employment should have wide enough application. Again, we reviewed many forms of how to determine this, but we anticipate that even the people in previous cohorts would be eligible, still be eligible under this new eligibility criteria. So again, if you were in round 5 or round 6, or even round 6.5, and your cohorts have not started yet, then for those new cohorts, we will use this to help, we will provide this information to you so you can help determine eligibility. Now, next question is, will we be able to use the new definition of underemployed? Yes, same question for round 6, and it's only if your training cohorts have not started yet. But if they are from this point forward, then we'll use that. And again, you'll get communication from CommCorp with all the supplemental materials. We'll even host probably a meeting just to explain this thoroughly so folks understand and feel comfortable moving forward. But again, it should be more widely accommodating for folks. So you should not have to worry about someone was eligible, but not anymore. That should not be the case. Okay. Now, this question from Bob is, this eligibility determination will still be performed by mass hire for underemployed determination. Bob, if you're on the call, can you clarify this question by you mean performed by mass hire?
Hi, so I have a round 5, and through the round 5 in conversations with some very awesome people at Mass Hire, I say that because I know Chris Clifford's on the call, and Meg, that Mass Hire takes the applicants and then they kind of do that initial qualification of the applicants, including verifying the unemployed and the underemployed component. So that is still going to be continue in the selection criteria of the applicants.
I'm going to answer this in 2 ways because I'm curious about what you mean when Mass Hire is doing their screening. If the Mass Hire staff is screening for CTI, the way that they screen is in support of CTI, but the entity that's actually confirming that eligibility and documenting it and maintaining record keeping is the school. So
Okay.
Mass Hire may do initial screening and say, oh, okay, you were eligible for this, or you may not have been eligible for this other program. Let me funnel you through CTI. They can do that assessment, but it's really just a screening. They're not formally, and they may even be able to do use the self-attestation documents and sign off and get that clearance for the school and make sure the person is ready to go once they're passed off. So yes to that. Now, if the Mass Hire Center is doing screening for their WIOA programming, that's not required for CTI. So I did want to sort of make that distinction that sometimes the Mass Hire Center, because they're a center, they don't know who's coming through their doors. The persons have to go through either a couple workshops and get their PIDs completed, sign up for JobQuest. All that is not required for CTI, but in partnership with the Mass Hire, especially if maybe some of the job employment partnerships don't amount to employment for your trainees, that they would funnel back into the Mass Hire system. Their information is already there so they can continue their job search.
Right.
Does that answer your question, Bob?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure, great. Okay, we got a question from Tris. Can the self-attestation form also be used to document no income? Yes. So the self-attestation form will have a number of options for it. It'll ask you, how did this person document their no income? Either they could provide unemployment paperwork or a separation letter from their employer, or they can just say that I'm unemployed. And that's also fine as long as you can, you as either the school or maybe the Mass Hire Center can sign off. That is sufficient. We won't make it no more burdensome than that. The self-attestation form, which before it was like a blurb on the participant form, it will actually be a form where we also account for, again, people with different sort of income situations, if they get paid seasonally, if they're on contract and they're not making if they're not reaching that threshold, that they can specify on the form, I'm a temporary worker, this is seasonal, I don't make this much annually, this is just for this time, to also allow them to move forward. And if this applicant had their income already verified at the Mass Hire Center because of another program, either a TANF program or WIOA, that career counselor, for example, knowing they're enrolled in that program and have that proof in front of them, can use that to verify. So again, there will be many documents, not many documents, but really just details on the ways that that person can be accommodated, and in attempt to limit the number of sort of hoops you might have to jump to verify employment, unemployment or underemployment. So next question here is from Kara. What's the eligibility requirement for CTI funds as employer or training provider? So the employer does not have I'll say this. To be eligible as an employer, you must employ Massachusetts residents and have operations in Massachusetts. The employer can be from Rhode Island or from anywhere, but if they have operations in Massachusetts and they're employing Massachusetts residents, they can be eligible to provide that unsubsidized employment for your participants. The training provider is the school. The school is doing the actual training. So you have to be a Chapter 74 designated Massachusetts Tech High School. And so you receive that, that designation from DESE. That's not something CommCorp can do, but we have Lou Lopes on the call. If you also are familiar with Assistant Secretary Bob LePage in that office over at, I think it's like, I'm blanking on the name, but that department can ensure that you get that DESE, through DESE can get that designation as a Chapter 74. Lou, did you have anything to add?
No. Liz Bennett, I think was the person you were thinking about. But they have to have a Chapter 74 certification in the program that they're going to provide training in.
Yes. Thank you, Lou. Hope that answers your question, Kara. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions here. Are sample MOAs included in the RFP? Yes, they're there. You can use them. You can also not use them. You can use something that is a little more tuned to the relationship that you want to have, but they are there as a framework. Many of the grantees use them as templates. Okay, can we please revisit Katani's statements regarding WIOA CTI eligibility? Sure. So if you want to go back, Meg, to slide, I believe it's slide 11.
Yep, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
We're very far away from that.
I'm just going to bring it up for you all. Okay. So my statements with respect to WIOA Title I services or the eligibility coming into CTI, and Nancy, if you were thinking more about eligibility, is that in order to be registered and eligible for WIOA as a dislocated worker, there is income eligibility, and generally you have to be low income. And so if you are participating in a low income program that already has you provide proof and that's documented, whether it's TANF or WIOA Title I as a dislocated worker, you are automatically eligible for CTI because our standards or the threshold for income is a bit higher than the low income that they're using for those programs. Does that make sense?
It does. I was referring more to Bob's question, and I was taking notes, but then I heard a statement, I thought, where you said there was no, so when the Career Center is working with a participant to see whether or not they will be eligible for a CTI program,
Yeah, I think I recall. So in that context, one of the things that I mentioned is participants come into the centers, they could be coming from anywhere, and they could be looking for training, whether it's a VST, an ITA, and so forth. Now, sometimes and I say this having operated 4 one-stops in Philadelphia, they go through many of their initial screening processes because we always have requirements on getting that person in. So they have to get their PID, they have to go through JobQuest, they need to do all these things before they're finally WIO registered. Now, all those front end steps, like did you go to welcome, did you go to the welcome orientation, did you do all this, is not required for CTI. And so what I'm trying to encourage is more of a streamlined process so that schools, and usually through we're hoping from your upskilling navigator, that they can identify the person, because if the school, for example, wants to reverse referral and say, hey, we can recruit through the career centers, just drop in there and they'll give you information for CTI. We don't want to have them going through a lot of these hurdles, but in the form of the relationship that we want the schools and the career centers to have, they can at the very least sort of sign up for JobQuest and understand that the Mass Hire Career Center is absolutely a resource and a public good for them to return to after training is over. There's other supports that Mass Hire could provide too. So in that sharing that you will detail in your MOA, we want the relationship to be sensitive to streamlining recruitment for CTI. We understand, again, that there might be some hurdles through the centers where they have to go this and do that. But we definitely want to ensure that both the CTI program is getting the recruit and the attention and the streamline that they need, and that the programs are supported, and that we're also encouraging engagement with the Mass Hire Career Center. Does that make sense? Answer your question, Nancy?
It does, but I might call you later or send you an email offline.
Sure. Okay, sure.
Further. I mean, we've had really good success and really good partnerships with our career centers, but
Great.
something is just sounding different to me, and then I have to work through what it is.
Okay. All right, sure.
Yeah.
I have a question here that what if employer can conduct training ourselves, but we still be eligible for fund? No, what I would say, I see that Jen Dresch answered the question. The employer can contribute to perhaps the training curriculum and even perhaps like lend itself as instruction and help the CTIs provide instruction, but the employer themselves won't be eligible for the funding directly because you have to be, again, a Chapter 74 eligible high school, and that program specifically needs to have that designated in order to receive this funding. And Jen just says no, but you can always talk to your local market maker. Yes, you can. They have grants available to assist training providers to find yours. So thank you, Jen, for that addition. Any other questions from this group?
I just wanted to ask a real quick one, which is for the MOAs, can they be signed electronically or do they have to have a physical signature?
I think in this day, I think electronic is fine. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Would overhead for facilities be allowable? In terms of allowable costs, what do you mean by overhead for facilities? Like paying rent, things like that? Yes, yeah, yes, you can pay towards your rent and lease. It's a part of the budget. You'll see it in the budget. You can charge to it. Great.
I would say there's the 10% cap on those indirect costs, right? That you can include indirect costs in your budget, costs that you need to run a program but are not necessarily specific to your grant. You're not just paying rent on your school for these programs. So you can include indirect costs. It's capped at 10% of your budget, which the RFP and the budget make clear.
All right, wonderful. Any other questions? Again, if you have questions that you're still mulling over, but need some time to get together, you can always reach out to CommCorp, CTI at commcorp.org. I put that in the chat. Also, myself and Meg are available to you at any point to help support you through this process. We thank you for joining us today. Again, this presentation isn't as fun as the pre-app TA one. This is really straightforward to the RFP. It is live. It is on the website. We look forward to seeing you in the on the other side of the application. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye now.